Why does my daughter call you husband human? The alien queen roared angrily. The alarm in Jack's helmet shrieked exactly 3 seconds before he saw the smoke trail. He'd been running perimeter checks on Outpost Kepler's eastern quadrant, which was exactly as exciting as it sounded. A whole lot of rust-colored sand, some rocks that looked suspiciously like other rocks, and occasionally a dust devil that broke up the monotony. The smoke changed everything. His boots kicked up orange plumes as he ran toward the impact site, one hand steadying the medical kit that banged against his hip. The escape pod had plowed a 70-meter gouge through the dunes before coming to rest against an outcropping of dark stone. The hull was a mess of scorched metal and crystalline panels he didn't recognize, still hissing and popping as it cooled. Jack cycled through his helmet's scanner modes, checking for radiation, toxic propellants, anything that might kill him before he played hero. The readings came back mostly clean, which on the frontier meant probably won't kill you immediately. He'd take it. The pod's hatch had been blown from the inside. Emergency bolts scattered across the sand smart pilot. Jack pulled himself up to the opening, and his headlamp cut through the smoke-filled interior. She was slumped against the far wall, unconscious, her flight suit torn and bloodied along one arm. Human, he thought at first. Then his light caught her profile and he saw the ears, elongated and swept back, definitely not standard issue anatomy. Her skin had an unusual warmth to its tone, and there were burns across her exposed forearm that looked painful even in the dim light. Well, this is either first contact or I've been out in the sun too long, Jack muttered, keying his comm. Static answered him. Right. The solar storms had been playing havoc with long-range communications for 3 days now. He was on his own. He checked her vitals with his scanner. Pulse steady, breathing shallow but regular, no obvious internal bleeding. Lucky. The nearest medical facility with alien-compatible equipment was 4 days away, even with good comms, and they definitely didn't have good comms. Jack made a decision that would probably earn him a reprimand later, and carefully lifted her out of the wreckage. She was lighter than he expected, her head lolling against his shoulder as he carried her back toward the outpost. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of copper and shadow, and somewhere overhead, Kepler's 3 moons were starting their nightly dance across the sky. His quarters were small, basically a glorified storage closet with a bed and a desk, but they had the advantage of being his. The outpost's understaffed medical bay would mean questions, reports, and probably Commander Williams having some kind of bureaucratic panic attack. Better to keep this simple until he figured out what he was dealing with. He laid her on his bunk and started cleaning the burns with the limited supplies from his kit. The wounds looked worse than they were, mostly superficial tissue damage. Whatever had happened to her ship, she'd managed to get out before the worst of it. She didn't wake for 3 days. Jack spent that time maintaining his normal duties, deflecting questions about why he seemed distracted, and sneaking back to his quarters every few hours to check on his unexpected guest. He rigged up a basic IV drip from medical supplies he definitely wasn't authorized to requisite, monitored her vitals, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that he was harboring an unknown alien in his bedroom. On the 3rd night, he dozed off in his desk chair, head pillowed on his arms. He woke to find her sitting up in his bed, watching him with eyes that reflected the dim emergency lighting like a cat's. "You're awake," he said brilliantly. She tilted her head, those unusual ears shifting with the movement. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, but her words were perfectly clear. "Where am I, and why does everything smell like recycled air and desperation?" Jack laughed before he could stop himself. "Outpost Kepler. Welcome to the least exciting posting in the Epsilon sector. I'm Lieutenant Jack Reeves. You crashed 3 days ago." "Vayra," she said, then winced, touching her bandaged arm. "And I didn't crash. Crashing implies pilot error. I had a disagreement with a meteor field." "How'd that work out for you?" "The meteors won." She looked around his cramped quarters with an expression somewhere between amusement and dismay. "This is where you live?" "The frontier life is very glamorous," Jack said. "Can I get you some water? Some answers about what you were doing flying solo through a meteor field?" She accepted the water, but not the question, drinking slowly while studying him with those reflective eyes. "You pulled me out. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do. Most people would have called authorities. Filed reports? Kept their distance from unknown aliens? Jack shrugged. Communications are down anyway, solar interference. Besides, you look like you could use the help more than I needed the paperwork. Something shifted in her expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. Thank you, Jack Reeves. Don't mention it, really, to anyone. I'm probably violating about 17 protocols right now. She smiled then, and Jack felt the first stirring of something that would change everything, though he wouldn't understand it for weeks yet. The solar storms cleared on the 13th day, and Jack felt the shift in the outpost rhythm. Before the official announcement came through, Vayra felt it too. She was sitting cross-legged on his bunk, dealing cards for another round of their improvised game, half poker, half something from her world that involved complex betting on hypothetical scenarios, when she suddenly went still. "They'll be looking for me now," she said quietly. Jack had known this moment was coming. 2 weeks of shared meals, late-night conversations, and learning to read each other's moods couldn't last forever. The frontier was built on temporary connections, people passing through on their way to somewhere else. He'd made peace with that years ago, except peace felt like a lie when he looked at her now. "Your people?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Eventually." She laid down a card with more force than necessary. "They'll send someone." The next few days took on a strange quality, time moving both too fast and unbearably slow. Vayra grew restless, pacing his small quarters when she thought he wasn't watching. Jack found excuses to extend his shifts, dreading and anticipating his return in equal measure. They'd fallen into something comfortable over the past 2 weeks, a rhythm that felt effortless. She'd mock his taste in entertainment. "How can you watch these ancient Earth films where everyone just punches problems until they're solved?" And he'd argue that sometimes punching was a perfectly valid diplomatic strategy. She'd tell him about her world's literature, painting pictures of stories that spanned generations, characters who lived and died while their tales continued. He'd share his reasons for choosing the frontier, the suffocating weight of expectations he'd left behind on Earth. Neither of them talked about what would happen when her rescue arrived. On the 17th night, they ended up on the observation deck. Kepler's moons hung in the sky like a juggler's balls frozen mid-throw, and the desert below stretched endlessly in every direction. Vayra stood at the viewport, her reflection ghostly against the darkness of space beyond. "I haven't been honest with you," she said. Jack's stomach dropped. "You're not really a freight pilot who had bad luck with meteors." "Oh, that part's true. The bad luck is very real." She turned to face him, and in the dim light, her elongated ears cast strange shadows. "But I left out the part about why I was flying alone, about what I was running from. Do I want to know? Probably not." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say I have family who expect certain things, who've planned out my entire existence like it's a ship's flight path. Every course correction calculated years in advance. Sometimes you need to veer off course just to remember you're the one flying." Jack understood that better than he wanted to admit. "My parents had my life mapped out before I could walk corporate law. Marriage to someone from the right family, a corner office with a view of Earth's skyline. I made it to 23 before I cracked and enlisted. They must have been thrilled. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 years. My father still introduces me as the one who's finding himself." Jack moved to stand beside her at the viewport. "Worth it, though. Out here, I'm just a maintenance officer who's moderately good at his job. No expectations beyond not accidentally venting the atmosphere. That's a low bar. I'm exceeding it daily." She laughed, and the sound loosened something in his chest. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the moon's slow procession. Then Vayra reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. "I've never told anyone that before," she said. "About running, about feeling trapped. Secrets are safe with me. I'm excellent at violating protocols, remember? Jack." She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "When I leave, when they come for me, I want you to know that these 2 weeks have mattered. You've mattered." He wanted to say something clever, something that would break the heaviness of the moment, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he squeezed her hand and nodded. And the signal came the next morning. A sleek silver ship dropped out of the upper atmosphere with the kind of grace that made Kepler's clunky supply vessels look like falling bricks. It hovered over the landing pad, all flowing curves and panels that seemed to shift colors in the sunlight. Vayra stood in Jack's quarters, no longer in his spare clothes but in a flight suit that had been packed in her escape pod's emergency kit. She looked like herself, but also like a stranger. Someone who belonged to that elegant ship and not his cramped room with its recycled air and broken climate control. "I should teach you something," she said suddenly. "Before I go, a phrase, in my language." She spoke slowly, the words melodic and complex, making him repeat them until his clumsy human tongue approximated the sounds. She smiled at his pronunciation, correcting gently, and he memorized the cadence, the way her ears shifted when he got it right. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It's a traditional farewell, something we say when we don't know if we'll meet again." They walked to the airlock together. The ship's crew waited at a respectful distance. Giving them space, Vayra took both his hands in hers, holding them tightly. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for not asking too many questions, for terrible card games and worse movie recommendations. Anytime you need to crash land near boring outposts, I'm your guy." She smiled, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Then she spoke. That phrase she'd taught him, but the way she said it was different, weighted with intention and emotion he didn't quite understand. Before he could respond, she pulled him close and kissed him. It lasted only a moment. Then she was gone, walking toward her ship without looking back. And Jack stood in the airlock, with the ghost of her words echoing in his mind, beautiful and utterly incomprehensible. The silver ship rose silently into the sky and vanished among the stars, leaving only dust and the memory of warmth against his lips. 3 months passed like sand through a cracked seal. Jack threw himself into work, volunteered for double shifts, and pretended the quarters didn't feel too empty. He caught himself sometimes turning to share a joke with someone who wasn't there, or dealing cards for 2 out of habit before remembering Commander Williams noticed. "You've been acting weird, Reeves. Weirder than usual. Just embracing the frontier lifestyle, sir. Solitude builds character. It builds madness. Take a day off before you start talking to the equipment." Jack didn't mention he'd already named the temperamental air filtration unit in sub-level 3. Beatrice was a delicate soul who required gentle coaxing and occasional threats. The morning everything changed started normally enough. Jack was elbow deep in Beatrice's guts, trying to convince her to stop making a grinding noise that suggested imminent catastrophic failure when the alarm started screaming. Not the usual minor system malfunction alarms that were basically the Outpost background music, but the full-scale, everyone panic variety. He pulled himself out of the maintenance shaft and grabbed his comm. "Reeves here. What's the crisis?" The response was chaos. Multiple voices talking over each other, someone shouting about defense grids, Williams yelling for everyone to shut up. Jack was already running toward the main level when the commander's voice cut through the noise. "All personnel to emergency stations. We have an unscheduled arrival. Capital class warship." Jack's blood went cold. Capital class meant serious firepower. The kind of ship that could reduce Outpost Kepler to its component atoms before they could finish filing the incident report. The main hangar was controlled chaos when he arrived. Every officer who could be spared from critical systems was there, forming something that might charitably be called an honor guard. If you squinted, Williams was sweating through his dress uniform, frantically consulting with anyone who might know proper diplomatic protocols for greeting heavily armed aliens. "What do they want?" Jack asked Peterson, who was trying to straighten his crooked name badge. "They're not saying, just demanded landing clearance in about 15 languages." Williams nearly had a stroke when he saw the size of that thing. Through the viewport, the ship was impossible to miss. It dwarfed everything in orbit, all elegant curves and crystalline structures that seemed to shift and flow. Like liquid metal, smaller escort vessels surrounded it like pilot fish around a shark. "That's Etherian," Jack heard someone whisper. "That's the Royal Fleet." His stomach dropped somewhere around his boots. The landing craft that descended was only slightly less terrifying than its mothership. It touched down with barely a whisper, and the hangar's hastily arranged welcome mat, really just some cleared deck space, and a portable podium someone had dragged out of storage looked even more pathetic by comparison. The hatch opened. Guards emerged first, tall figures in armor that seemed to absorb light. Then came courtiers in flowing robes, their elongated ears adorned with jewelry that chimed softly. Finally she appeared. The queen was impossible to look at directly and impossible to look away from. Her skin held a golden luminescence that made the hangar's light seem dim. Her ears swept back like wings, piercing, catching the light. She wore robes that defied physics, flowing around her as if moved by wind that didn't exist in the recycled air. But it was her eyes that struck Jack. The same unusual shade as Vayra's, but harder, colder, weighted with the kind of authority that came from ruling star systems. She surveyed the assembled humans with an expression that suggested we were an interesting species of insect. William stepped forward, beginning some prepared speech about the honor of her visit, Thalara, because who else could this possibly be? Cut him off with a gesture. When she spoke, her voice resonated with harmonics that made Jack's ribs vibrate. I am Queen Thalara of the Etherean dynasty, keeper of the seven flames, guardian of the stellar gates. She paused and her eyes swept the crowd with predatory focus. Which one of you is the human? Williams opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a suffocating fish. Your Majesty, we're all human. The human who corrupted my daughter's honor. Her voice could have frozen hydrogen. The one who dared perform sacred rites without comprehension or permission. The fool who has created an interstellar incident. Her gaze locked onto Jack like a targeting system. You step forward. Every head in the hangar turned. Jack felt his legs move on autopilot, carrying him through the crowd while his brain screamed about the wisdom of approaching an alien queen who looked ready to commit murder. He stopped a respectful distance away. Lieutenant Jack Reeves, Your Majesty. Lieutenant, she made his rank sound like an insult. Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm getting the sense I'm about to find out. A courtier gasped at his tone. The guards tensed. Thalara's eyes narrowed dangerously. Why does my daughter call you husband, human? The word husband landed like a physical blow, and the air around the queen literally crackled with energy. Jack's brain short-circuited. I'm sorry, she what? Do not play ignorant with me. The lights flickered. Williams made a small whimpering sound. Vayra has declared before the High Council that she spoke the eternal vow. That you accepted. That you are bound. I don't... Jack started, then stopped as puzzle pieces began slamming together in his head. The phrase Vayra taught him, the way she'd said it at their parting, weighted with emotion. The kiss. Oh no, he said quietly. Oh yes, Thalara hissed behind her. Pushing through the wall of courtiers came Vayra. She wore formal robes now, nothing like the casual pilot who'd shared his quarters, but her face flushed, that same violet shade. He remembered embarrassment and something else. Hope, maybe, or fear. Mother, please, I tried to explain. You performed the eternal vow with a human who didn't even understand the words. The conference room had never hosted anything more significant than arguments about supply requisitions and one memorable debate about whether the cafeteria's mystery protein constituted a war crime. Now it held alien royalty, and the space seemed to shrink accordingly. Jack sat across from Queen Thalara, while Commander Williams sweated through his second uniform of the day. The outpost diplomatic officer, Lieutenant Chen, had her tablet out and was frantically scrolling through first contact protocols that were decidedly unhelpful for accidentally married an alien princess. Vayra sat beside her mother, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. She hadn't looked directly at Jack since they'd moved inside, and he couldn't decide if that was better or worse. A holographic projector hummed to life in the center of the table, generating a real-time translation matrix that would theoretically prevent further catastrophic misunderstandings. Theoretically. Let us establish facts, Thalara said, her tone suggesting she was being extraordinarily patient, and everyone should be grateful. 3 months ago, my daughter crash-landed near this facility. Disagreed with a meteor field, Jack corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it when every Etherean in the room stared at him. Vayra's lips twitched, almost a smile. Thalara continued as if he hadn't spoken. You provided her shelter, medical care, for 2 weeks. Yes, Your Majesty. And during this time, she taught you phrases in our language. Jack nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Specifically, she taught you the words of the Eternal Vow, our most sacred bonding ceremony, and you repeated them at her departure. She told me it was a traditional farewell, Jack protested. Vayra finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. It is a farewell, a very specific one. The translator helpfully projected the phrase in shimmering letters above the table, then beneath it provided the translation. I bind my heart to yours across all the vast darkness between stars. Let no distance sever what this moment joins. I am yours as you are mine, until the last star fades. Williams made a strangled sound. Chen's stylus clattered to the table. That is slightly more intense than safe travels, Jack admitted. You think? Thalara's voice could have cut steel. This vow is spoken once in a lifetime. It is witnessed by families, blessed by elders, recorded in our sacred archives. It binds two souls permanently, legally, spiritually. In my defense, Jack said carefully, when someone teaches you a phrase in their language, you generally assume they're not teaching you how to accidentally marry them. It wasn't an accident, Vayra said suddenly. Every head turned toward her. The violet flush had spread to her ears. I knew what I was teaching you. Thalara's expression suggested she was reconsidering her earlier restraint regarding violence. You what? The Queen's voice dropped dangerously low. I thought, Vayra's hands twisted in her lap. We'd spent 2 weeks together. We talked about everything. He made me laugh. He understood what it meant to feel trapped by other people's expectations. When he held my hand on the observation deck and told me I mattered, I thought, she finally met Jack's eyes. I thought you understood, that you were choosing this too. Jack's mind reeled back through those final days, the weight in her expression when she'd taken his hand, the care with which she'd taught him the phrase, making him repeat it until he got it right. The intensity in her voice when she'd said the words before kissing him goodbye. You thought I was proposing back, he said slowly. The eternal vow must be spoken by both parties to be binding. When you repeated the words after me, when you said them at the airlock, she looked down. I thought you knew. This is absurd, Thalara interjected. A marriage built on miscommunication and cultural ignorance. To be fair, Jack said, that describes a lot of marriages. Chen kicked him under the table. But Vayra laughed, a short, surprised sound that broke the tension like a stone through ice. Even Thalara's severe expression cracked slightly at the edges. The human makes jokes while facing a dynastic crisis, one of the courtiers murmured. It's a coping mechanism, Jack explained. That and fixing things that aren't actually broken, I'm very versatile. Thalara studied him with an expression somewhere between exasperation and grudging respect. You seem remarkably calm about discovering you married a princess. I'm having a delayed reaction. Check back in an hour when the full panic sets in. We don't have an hour. We have a situation that requires immediate resolution. The Queen gestured and the translator projected new information. Complex legal documents, genealogical charts, what looked like constitutional amendments. The eternal vow, once spoken and accepted by both parties, cannot be easily dissolved. It would require testimony before the High Council, a formal investigation into the circumstances, public hearings that would humiliate my daughter and create a scandal reaching across multiple star systems. Williams looked ready to pass out. Jack couldn't blame him. Or? Jack asked because there was clearly an or coming. Or we acknowledge the marriage as legitimate. Thalara's eyes bored into him. You would become prince consort of the Etherian dynasty. You would have duties, responsibilities, security clearances that would make your current governments very nervous. Your life would fundamentally change. And if we go the annulment route, Vayra becomes the subject of scandal. Her position in the succession becomes complicated. Political rivals use this as ammunition. She bears the shame of a broken vow, something that has never happened in 3,000 years of our history. Jack looked at Vayra, who was staring at her hands. Her ears were pressed flat against her head in what he'd learned was a sign of distress. Those are terrible options, he said. Yes, Thalara agreed. Welcome to politics. Choose quickly. Thalara stood abruptly, her robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. I am giving you one evening to decide my daughter will remain here. You will talk. You will determine if this bond was mere accident or something more. She fixed Jack with a look that could melt hull plating. Choose wisely, human. The consequences extend far beyond your small world. The queen swept from the room with her entourage trailing behind like a comet's tail. Williams and Chen followed hastily, muttering about security arrangements and diplomatic protocols. The door hissed shut, leaving Jack and Vayra alone in the suddenly too quiet conference room. Vayra still hadn't looked up from her hands. So, Jack said eventually, this is awkward. She laughed, but it came out shaky. That's one word for it. I have others. Catastrophic absurd. Cosmically improbable. I'm sorry. Her voice was barely a whisper. I should have been clearer. Should have asked instead of assuming I just thought, after everything we shared. Hey. Jack moved around the table to sit beside her. You're not the only one who could have asked questions. I could have looked up what you were teaching me. Could have wondered why you seemed so intense about a farewell phrase. You trusted me. I do. He paused, trying to organize thoughts that felt like scattered debris after a hull breach. Vayra, those 2 weeks were the best I've had in years. Maybe ever. You made this boring outpost feel like somewhere worth being. She finally looked at him, her unusual eyes reflecting the conference room's harsh lighting. Then why didn't you follow? Why didn't you send messages? Because I thought you were way out of my league. You were this mysterious, brilliant person who crashed into my life temporarily. I figured once you left, you'd remember you had better options than a maintenance officer on the galaxy's least exciting posting. He rubbed the back of his neck. Also, I had no idea how to contact you. You never mentioned being royalty. I was trying not to be royalty for 2 weeks. Just Vayra. Just someone who could make her own choices without committees and protocols and... She gestured frustratedly. Everything. Mission accomplished. You chose the one human guaranteed to create the maximum amount of diplomatic chaos. You're not giving yourself enough credit. I'm sure there are humans who could have caused more chaos. Thanks. That's very comforting. They sat in silence for a moment. Through the viewport, Kepler's moons were beginning their nightly performance, and Jack remembered standing on the observation deck with Vayra, her hand warm in his. What happens if we do this? He asked. If we say the marriage is real? You'd come with me to the palace, to the dynasty. There would be ceremonies, presentations, probably several months of intensive cultural education, so you don't accidentally insult a trade delegation. She managed a weak smile. You'd hate the formal dinners. So much silverware. And the conversations are 90% politics and 10% elaborate passive-aggressive compliments. Sounds terrible. It really is. And you'd be stuck with a husband who doesn't know which fork to use and thinks punching is valid diplomacy. I'm starting to think that might be refreshing. She turned to face him fully. But Jack, I can't ask you to do this. To give up your life here, your freedom, everything you chose when you left Earth, it wouldn't be fair. What about the annulment option? What would that actually mean for you? Vayra's ears pressed flat again. Public humiliation, political vulnerability. My mother has rivals who would use this to undermine our position. And the shame of a broken vow. It's not just social embarrassment. It's considered a spiritual failure, a sign of poor judgment and weak character. That's ridiculous. You made a mistake. I bound myself to someone without their full understanding. In our culture, that's worse than not binding at all. It suggests I can't be trusted with important decisions. She looked away. They'd be right. Stop that. Jack's voice came out sharper than he intended. You trusted me with the most important choice of your life. That's not poor judgment. That's... He paused, searching for words. That's brave, terrifying, but brave. Is it brave if it ruins both our lives? To be determined. He stood, pacing to the viewport. The desert stretched endlessly below, painted silver by moonlight. You know what's funny? My parents spent years trying to plan out my perfect life. The right schools, the right career, the right partner from the right family. They had spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets. That sounds excessive. It was insane. But their whole argument was that left to my own devices, I'd make terrible decisions that I needed guidance to avoid ruining my future. He turned back to face her. I spent years proving them wrong by making my own choices, coming out here, building a life on my terms. And now I'm faced with probably the biggest decision I'll ever make, and I have no idea what the right answer is. That's not reassuring. I'm getting to the reassuring part. He moved back to sit beside her. Here's what I know. Those 2 weeks with you were real. The conversations, the laughter, the feeling that I'd found someone who actually understood, all of it was real. When you left, I felt like someone had scooped out part of my chest and taken it with them. Vayra's breath caught. I don't know if that's enough to build a marriage on. I don't know if I can handle being royalty or using the right fork or not accidentally starting interstellar incidents, but I know I spent 3 months trying to convince myself I was fine without you, and I was lying the whole time. Jack, let me finish. You asked why I didn't follow, didn't send messages. The truth, I was scared, because caring about someone that much after 2 weeks seemed impossible. It seemed like something I must have imagined or exaggerated. Safer to let you go than risk finding out it wasn't real. He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. But you're here, and this is definitely real. Possibly too real. Extremely, catastrophically real. She laughed through tears that had started flowing without him noticing. We're a disaster. The best kind. They stayed in the conference room through most of the night, talking the way they had during those 2 weeks in his quarters. Vayra told him about the palace, the sprawling complex that housed 3 generations of her family, the gardens that grew plants from 17 different worlds, the library containing texts older than human civilization. She described the politics with brutal honesty, the factions, the compromises, the constant weight of representing something larger than herself. Jack shared his own truths. The relief he'd felt escaping Earth, the loneliness he'd discovered on the frontier, the way he'd convinced himself that isolation was freedom. He talked about his family, and Vayra listened without judgment when he admitted he missed them, despite everything. They'll be horrified when they find out I married alien royalty, he said. More horrified than when you enlisted? Honestly, they'll probably throw a party. This is exactly the kind of prestigious connection they always wanted, just with more tentacles than expected. I don't have tentacles. Your mother's entourage was tentacle adjacent. Those robes moved in unsettling ways. She threw a stylus at him, and he caught it laughing. It felt like before, easy and natural, and Jack realized that was the answer he'd been searching for. Not whether he could handle being a prince, but whether he could imagine his life without this. He couldn't. Dawn was painting the desert in shades of amber when he finally said it. I want to do this, not because it's the practical choice or the diplomatic solution, because I want to be with you, even if it means learning which fork to use. There are 17 different forks for formal dinners. I'm already regretting this. Are you? She studied his face carefully, and he saw his own fears reflected in her eyes. No, he said honestly. Terrified, but not regretting. There's a difference. She kissed him then, soft and certain, and it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. They found Queen Thalara on the observation deck, watching the sunrise while her guards maintained a respectful distance. She didn't turn when they approached, but Jack suspected she'd known they were coming. We've decided, Vayra said. Have you? Thalara's voice was neutral, unreadable. We're honoring the vow. Jack stepped forward to stand beside Vayra, their hands linked. I know I'm not what you wanted for your daughter. I don't have the right bloodline or training or any idea what I'm doing, but I care about her and I'm willing to learn. Willing to learn, Thalara repeated. She finally turned to face them, and Jack braced for anger. Instead, he saw something that might have been satisfaction. Do you know why I came here personally, Lieutenant Reeves? Why I brought my full guard and half the court? To terrify me into making the right choice? That was secondary. A smile ghosted across her severe features. I came because my daughter, who has spent her entire life meeting expectations and following protocols, broke every rule to bind herself to a stranger. She risked scandal, political catastrophe, and my considerable wrath. That suggested this stranger might be worth knowing. Vayra's hand tightened in Jack's. I've spent the past 3 months watching her, Thalara continued. She was different after returning from this outpost. Lighter. More herself than I'd seen in years. She smiled at nothing. She fought me on the annulment with a passion I'd never witnessed in any political debate. The Queen's gaze shifted to her daughter. You were happy. I was, Vayra said quietly. Happiness is rare in our position. Duty, honor, responsibility. These we have in abundance, but genuine connection? Thalara shook her head. My own bonding was arranged for political advantage. 30 years of mutual respect in separate quarters. I would not wish that for you. She turned back to Jack. So yes, Lieutenant, you are not what I wanted for my daughter. You are untrained, politically naive, and your sense of humor borders on insubordination. But you make her happy. And that, I have decided, is worth 17 violated protocols and the migraine this will cause my advisors. Thank you, Your Majesty, Jack managed. Don't thank me yet. The cultural education program is genuinely painful, and my mother will attempt to poison you at least once to test your constitution. It's traditional. I'm sorry, Poison. Just a little. You'll probably survive. Thalara's expression softened slightly. Welcome to the family, Prince Consort. Try not to start any wars. The next hours blurred together. Commander Williams oscillated between relief that the crisis was resolved and panic about the political implications. Chen recorded everything for 7 different reports. Vayra's attendants descended on Jack with measuring tools and scanners, already planning formal attire that would apparently require 3 fittings and a blessing from the Textile Guild. Jack found himself back in his quarters one final time, packing the few possessions worth bringing. Vayra stood in the doorway, watching him stuff clothes into a bag with absolutely no organization. Second thoughts? She asked. About 50 per minute. You? At least 70. She stepped inside, running her fingers along the desk where they'd played cards. I can't promise this will be easy. The palace is complicated. People will judge you, test you, wait for you to fail. Sounds like family dinner on Earth. I'm prepared. I'm serious, Jack. He stopped packing and crossed to take her hands. So am I. I'm not going into this blind. I know it'll be hard. I know I'll make mistakes and embarrass myself and probably accidentally insult someone important. But I also know I'd rather face that with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. She pulled him close, resting her forehead against his. When we get to the palace, I need to teach you the proper phrases, starting with I love you, since we seem to have skipped that step. We did things backward. We did everything backward. How do you say it? I love you. She spoke 3 musical syllables, and Jack repeated them carefully, feeling the shape of the words. Better, she said, but you might have just told me you appreciate my agricultural policy. I do appreciate your agricultural policy, very sustainable. She laughed, and Jack knew he'd made the right choice. Maybe the improbable choice, maybe the chaotic choice, but the right one nonetheless. They left Outpost Kepler as Kepler's moon set and the binary stars rose over the horizon. The royal ship swallowed them into its elegant belly, and through the viewport, Jack watched the desert fall away. Somewhere down there, Beatrice, the air filtration unit, would continue her temperamental existence without him. Vayra slipped her hand into his as the stars stretched around them, and Jack squeezed back. Ahead lay palaces and politics, 17 forks and potential poisoning. A whole new life he couldn't have imagined 3 months ago. But he'd have her, and somehow, impossibly, that made the vast darkness between stars feel a little less dark. The end.